Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, one of my favorite albums as a kid. This is like Rolling Stones, I think, #1 album of all time. There's no other album cover that looked like this at the time. It's the first album cover to come like this. And they did like, see the Beatles right here, and supposedly these are pot leaves right here. If you look at that little flower arrangement, that's Paul's bass right there, a little flower arrangement right there. And somebody had left this Rolling Stones doll at the studio. They stuck it in the picture. Wax figures of the Beatles. There they are. And then the inside, cool picture right there. You know, they always said Paul was dead, right? He died in '66. That was the big rumor at the time there. There was some patch on his uniform that indicated that, but it was really all just hearsay kind of thing. It came out in '67, so they had heard Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, I believe, right? And so they wanted to do something better than that. So they would do like 2 albums a year and then singles as well. And the singles weren't on the albums. You know, they felt that if they would put the singles on the albums, that they were shortchanging people. In '66, they came off their last tour. They released Revolver at the end of '66, and then they didn't do anything. Everybody thought they were dried up. They're like washed up, right? They were just recording this album. They released this in June. So it took usually they release something in the spring, I think is what it was. So they waited till June to release it. They never thought this was like, you know, these guys don't have anything left in them. That's why it took them so long. They just recorded this album all the time, and it came out and just floored everybody. It's like the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger was saying, he goes, yeah, we're just kind of waiting to see what the Beatles released to see where pop music was going to go next. The album was different. It's the first time they ever got to do an album because they had 2 record labels. They had the European record label, EMI, then they had Capitol here in the US. They would always mess with their albums, right? You know, change the order of things or whatever, make it fit the American market better or whatever. They just said, you're not touching this album. And they argued with them at first. They said, we'll find somebody else in the US to carry the album. They said, yeah, no problem. We won't touch the album, you know. And so it's just like the album's got almost no space between that 2-second space or 3-second space is almost non-existent. You know, that was a huge thing. Just the way the album, just the songs, the way it sounded, you know, they were using a lot of new instruments, a lot of Indian instruments, you know, a lot more keyboard stuff. And then just, this is great songs. I mean, they're always trying to, if they did it, they made millions of dollars with it the year before, they didn't want to do it again if they'd done it, you know, no matter how successful it was. That's why, you know, next year they did a completely different direction. They did a 2-record set, which nobody was really doing at that time. And no one wanted them to do it, the producer or anything, nobody wanted them to do it. They did it anyway. And, you know, it's like the biggest selling albums in history. Jeff Emmerich engineered this, and then George Martin produced it. Jeff Emmerich, who I got to meet, he did Revolver before this. He just changed the way they recorded stuff. You know, EMI had these strict standards. You could, if you were an engineer, you didn't go down to the floor where the band was. You called a technical guy to come in and do that. He wore a gray lab coat or whatever. You know what I mean? It was like really funny. It was real class oriented, as it would be like in the UK. And you know, the UK was behind the US in terms of recording. Yet everybody was waiting to see what these guys were going to do because everybody was trying to sound like this. It's kind of funny. I mean, this was all done on 4-track. So 4-track tape machine. And the US was already using 8 tracks for a few years at this point, you know, to record stuff. So they did on 4-track. They would take one 4-track machine. They always played live together as a band. They liked to play together. They'd fill the whole machine up, J37, Studio J37 machine. Then they would take those 4 tracks, dump it down to 1 track of another machine. And that would take up 1 track, and they'd have 3 tracks left to fill in. They did that a couple times. So you would have a generation loss every time you bounced it, but it's a good machine. It's the best 4-track machine probably ever. So it sounded really good still. But you can hear that kind of, it's kind of what made it sound the way it sounds. You know, just with those, we call them reduction mixes. A Day in the Life, they had the big orchestra build it. They did they recorded the orchestra, 41-piece orchestra. They recorded on 4 separate tracks. They recorded them, right? They were just telling the guys in the orchestra that they weren't getting the right take. But really, they had to pay them for every time they did a performance, so they didn't tell them that. They were cheaping out even back then. EMI was cheaping out on them. But and then they took that and they synced the machine as best they could with the other 4-track machine that had the band tracks, and that's you can hear that build up while the band's playing, and you can hear it's just off a little bit because that's what it was. You know, it was like okay, ready, go. This is happening all during the mix. You know, it's like it's like performance, the mix. That's how it always was before, digital audio workstations and stuff. You know, everybody had to take a fader or whatever. You're like, okay, at 3 minutes 11 seconds, boost this right here or pull it back. You know, so everybody had to be ready on the. Oh, I missed my part. Oh man, start it all over again. but yeah, I think this album was basically recorded with 4-track machines. You know, and then they did for the rest of that year, and then next '68, halfway through the White Albums, they finally started using 8-tracks. So they never got beyond 8-track. Emmerich used the Fairchild on like everything. Vocals. There's the 660, the 670. I use it too. I'll plug it. So Jeff Emmerich he close mic'd the drums. No one had done that before. He started doing that on Revolver. And he got in trouble for that because that was against EMI policy. You couldn't, no close mic. The drums, each mic had a minimum distance it could be to whatever you were miking. So you just go and they started recording late after hours by this time. So he would go and wait till late. They were there late, so he'd sometimes still be set up the next day though, and they'd get in trouble. But on the album before this, Revolver, they did stuff like they put the vocal microphone through Leslie speaker, like a Leslie, is it 820, I think, but something like that. And then for like on John's voice on Tomorrow Never Knows, and you can hear that part. It sounds awesome. When it comes on like that after the little middle 8 section, it's like, yeah. But that's a ripping song too. But yeah, the drums just got huge because you couldn't really hear them that well in a lot of stuff. And you definitely couldn't hear the bass before that. And this is like a self-contained unit, right? Most stereos back then were. So you didn't want the bass to be too loud because it would vibrate in the box and make stylus skip right there. So in the UK was really typical whatever you want to say English form or whatever. They took that to the extreme. So bass was really weak on all the albums. If it was there, it just had no low end. Yeah, but the U.S. albums had low end, especially the R&B stuff, James Jamerson, all that cool Motown stuff. And they were complaining about that. The Beatles were. So by the album before this, Revolver, they turned the bass up finally, and then it's pretty. You can hear it like on a Day in the Life right there. It's pretty loud at this point. But and they pretty much did everything else like that. Their mixes got a lot more modern sounding. The early stuff was recorded like they all played to 1 track. Just you had drums, bass, and a couple guitars, and maybe vocals too, going down to 1 track in the studio. And so there was nothing you could do to that. It had to be right going down. They might overdub some more backgrounds, hand claps. George sometimes would double his guitar solo. You hear that a lot in the early Beatles stuff, and that would be the other track. But yeah, that's why you can hear stuff sometimes. Cool, little funny sounds in the original records. For whatever reason, they tried taking all that stuff out nowadays. I don't know why. Back then, stereo wasn't a thing really. Stereo wasn't king, right? Mono was still king. So they would do the mix of the album, which was in mono. The Beatles would all be there, everybody be hanging. It's like the big thing. It's like, oh, and then the U.S. wants a stereo mix. Okay, so they just roll that out later. Beatles weren't even there for that. No one really cared that much about it. And that's here in the U.S. That's what we all know. The stereo mixes where the whole band is on one side. If you're listening to headphones and the vocals are on the other side here, which was kind of a trip. A lot of stuff in the U.S. did that for us because stereo was so new. They were just trying to, take advantage of the stereo field. But it was really out of whack. Instead of trying to create a stereo field, they just hard panned major things to one side or the other. things that you wouldn't do anymore. They had to cut and splicing. They actually had to cut the tape, glue it, tape it back together again.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Sounds like mainly people. So, what you didn't hear those laughs and all that kind of stuff, that stuff's all gone. For some reason, they had to remix and took that stuff out now. So there's a lot of stuff here that I haven't heard in years, because I haven't listened to the LP in years. I don't know if you can hear that, like that reverb on the vocal. That's like just a little reverb. They played this song live. They had a bass later. I think all three of them were playing guitar, and Ringo on drums, and Paul singing live, and they had the harmonies out. But he did a guide vocal and they replaced it. And so they played everything live. I mean, you figure the first 4 albums these guys did, they played it live in the studio, vocals and everything at the same time. They were recording what's called a twin track. So they only used the second track for just more overdubs. Yeah, it's like 3 pianos. So it's like the Steinways, I think one of the uprights, maybe the Mrs. Mills piano, then like another one. And they all played it. Even some of, I think one of the Rolling Stones, Brian Jones, was playing it. George Martin, of course, the producer, played a lot of piano and keyboards and all the Beatles stuff. He's on there too. This goes on forever. And then what you don't hear, but that's actually there, is a dog whistle. No one can hear it because it's too high. It's above 20K. So we don't hear that. But it's on there. So they thought it would be funny to do that.